I never thought a simple knock on the door could completely rewrite the entire trajectory of my life. But looking back, that was the exact moment the countdown started. It was a rainy Tuesday night in late October, the kind of dreary, bone-chilling Seattle evening where all you want to do is curl up on the couch with a hot drink and forget the rest of the world exists. My wife, Chloe, was already asleep upstairs, or at least I thought she was, exhausted from a long week at her marketing firm. We had been married for 4 years, built a beautiful life together in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside the city, and bought a charming fixer-upper that we spent countless weekends painting and remodeling. Our life was comfortable, predictable, and safe. We had our routines, our shared jokes, and a deep, quiet affection that felt like it would last forever. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent, a sharp, erratic tapping that cut through the low hum of the television and the steady drumming of the rain against the window panes. When I opened the door, I found my best friend, Marcus, standing on the porch, completely drenched, shivering, and holding a single duffel bag. Marcus and I had been inseparable since our freshman year at Ohio State. He was the guy who always had a smile on his face, the life of every party, and the most fiercely loyal friend I had ever known. But the man standing on my porch that night looked completely broken. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes were bloodshot, and his usual vibrant energy was entirely gone. He didn't even wait for me to ask what was wrong before he looked at me with absolute desperation and told me that his fiancée had cheated on him, kicked him out of their apartment, and left him with absolutely nothing. Seeing him like that broke something inside me. Without hesitation, I pulled him into a hug, grabbed his bag, and told him he could stay with us for as long as he needed. I genuinely believed I was doing the right thing, fulfilling the silent vow of brotherhood we had made years ago. I had no idea that by opening that door, I was letting in the very storm that would tear my entire world apart. The first few weeks were easy enough. We set Marcus up on the large sectional couch in our basement living room, giving him his own space to grieve, process, and figure out his next steps. Chloe was incredibly supportive at first, offering to cook extra portions for dinner and making sure he felt welcome in our home. She knew how much Marcus meant to me, and seeing her show him so much kindness only made me love her more. We would all sit around the dinner table, drinking wine and talking about old college memories, trying to make Marcus laugh and remind him of who he was before his world collapsed. Slowly, the color started returning to his face, and his quick-witted, charming personality began to resurface. He started looking for a new job, helping out around the house, and doing everything he could to not be a burden. I felt proud of how Chloe and I were handling the situation, believing that our marriage was strong enough to weather any temporary disruption. But as the days turned into weeks, the subtle dynamics in our house began to shift in ways I was too blind to notice. Because of my job as an architectural consultant, I frequently had to travel out of town for site visits, sometimes leaving for 3 or 4 days at a time. I hated leaving Chloe alone, but knowing Marcus was downstairs actually gave me a sense of peace. I thought he could protect her if anything happened, and it comforted me to know she wouldn't be lonely in our big house. I didn't realize that the loneliness I was trying to prevent was creating a dangerous vacuum. While I was away in corporate boardrooms and dusty construction zones, Chloe and Marcus were spending hours together, sharing the quiet spaces of our home. They started drinking coffee together in the mornings before work, venting about their daily stressors, and watching movies late into the night. It started innocently, 2 people finding comfort in each other's company. But familiarity is a powerful, deceptive thing. It blurs lines so slowly that you don't even realize you've crossed them until it's far too late. I started noticing small changes when I would return from my trips. The atmosphere in the house felt different, charged with a strange, unspoken tension that I couldn't quite put my finger on. When the 3 of us sat down for dinner, there were inside jokes I didn't understand, references to conversations I hadn't been a part of, and quick, fleeting glances between my wife and my best friend that made a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just paranoid, exhausted from work, and projecting my own insecurities onto the 2 people I trusted most in the world. Chloe was my rock, and Marcus was my brother. The very idea of anything happening between them was so monstrous, so completely outside the realm of possibility, that I forced myself to bury the suspicion deep down. I convinced myself that they were just becoming good friends, which was exactly what I had wanted in the first place. Then came the middle of December. I was scheduled to fly to Chicago for a major 4-day conference that was crucial for my firm. The morning I left, Chloe seemed unusually distant. She kissed me goodbye, but her lips felt cold, her mind seemingly miles away. Marcus shook my hand, thanked me again for letting him stay, and promised to keep an eye on the place. As I drove to the airport, a suffocating sense of dread settled over me, a persistent weight in my chest that whispered that something was terribly wrong. I tried to shake it off during the flight, focusing on my presentation slides, but the anxiety only grew. By the time I arrived at my hotel in Chicago, the feeling was unbearable. That evening, the conference organizers unexpectedly announced that due to a massive incoming blizzard, the main sessions were being compressed, and the rest of the event was canceled so everyone could fly out before the airport shut down. My presentation was moved up, and by 2 p.m. the next day, I was free. Instead of staying in Chicago, I managed to book the last available flight back to Seattle, desperate to get home, surprise my wife, and crawl into my own bed. I didn't call Chloe to tell her I was coming early. I wanted to see the look of pure joy on her face when I walked through the door, wanting to surprise her with the expensive earrings I had bought her at the airport terminal. I landed in Seattle around 10:30 p.m., the city blanketed in a thick, eerie fog. The Uber ride home felt like it took an eternity, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't logically explain. When the car finally pulled up to our house, I noticed that all the downstairs lights were off, but a soft, warm glow was emanating from the master bedroom upstairs. I paid the driver, grabbed my suitcase, and walked up the snow-dusted driveway. The house was dead silent, standing like a dark sentinel in the night. I quietly unlocked the front door, stepping into the dark foyer, carefully sliding my shoes off so I wouldn't make a sound. I wanted to sneak upstairs, slip into bed next to her, and hold her tight. As I walked past the living room toward the stairs, I noticed Marcus's duffel bag was still by the couch, but the basement door was cracked open, a faint light spilling out. I paused, wondering if he was awake, but decided to check on Chloe first. With every step I took up the wooden staircase, the silence in the house seemed to grow heavier, thicker, until it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my lungs. When I reached the top landing, I froze. The master bedroom door was ajar, and cutting through the darkness of the hallway was a sound that instantly turned the blood in my veins to pure ice. It wasn't the sound of my wife sleeping. It was a low, breathless whisper, followed by a soft, familiar laugh that didn't belong to me, and the distinct, unmistakable sound of shifting sheets. My heart hammered against my ribs so violently I thought it would burst, a wave of cold, paralyzing nausea washing over me as I took a slow, agonizing step toward the door. My hand shook so violently that the metal zipper on my duffel bag let out a tiny metallic click against the strap. I held my breath, freezing in place on the hardwood floor of the upstairs hallway, praying they hadn't heard me. The air up there felt suffocatingly hot, thick with the scent of Chloe's expensive lavender perfume mixed with something else, a heavier, muskier smell that completely turned my stomach. I stood there in the shadows for what felt like an eternity, trapped in a horrific limbo, praying with every fiber of my being that I was wrong. Maybe she was watching a movie. Maybe she was talking on the phone. I desperately scrambled for any logical explanation, any lie I could tell myself to protect my sanity from the devastating truth that was waiting just 3 inches behind that cracked door. But then, the whisper started again, louder this time, stripping away any lingering doubt. It was Marcus's voice, the same voice that had given the best man speech at my wedding, the same voice that had thanked me for saving his life just weeks ago. He was telling her how beautiful she was, his tone filled with an easy, confident intimacy that shattered a piece of my soul with every syllable. And then came Chloe's response, a quiet, breathless giggle, a sound she used to make only when I held her close in the dark. It was a knife straight to the chest. The two people I loved most, the two people I would have taken a bullet for, were rewriting my entire life as a cruel joke right inside the bed I had built with my own hands. A blinding, white-hot rush of adrenaline slammed into my system. My vision blurred at the edges, and for a split second, I thought I might actually pass out from the sheer physical shock of it. I didn't think. I just reacted.
I took 2 heavy strides forward and slammed my palm against the bedroom door, throwing it wide open so hard it rebounded off the drywall with a deafening crash. The scene inside froze, like a horrific photograph burned into the back of my eyelids forever. The bedside lamp was on, casting a dim amber glow over the room. Marcus was sitting up against the headboard, his bare chest glistening in the light, while Chloe was tangled in the white duvet next to him, her silk nightgown twisted around her waist. The moment the door hit the wall, they both gasped, their eyes widening in absolute paralyzing terror as they looked at me, standing in the doorway, still clutching my suitcase handle. The sheer, unadulterated guilt on their faces was the loudest confession I could have ever asked for. For a long, agonizing 5 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The only sound in the room was the heavy, ragged gasping coming from my own chest, sounding like a dying animal trying to find air. Chloe was the first to break the silence. Her face turned a ghostly, translucent white, and she instantly scrambled backward, pulling the top sheet up to her chin as if she could hide her betrayal behind a piece of cotton. Her voice was thin, trembling, and completely unrecognizable when she finally gasped out my name. Marcus looked like he had just seen a ghost, all the slick, effortless charm completely draining from his body.
He looked down at his lap, unable to hold my gaze, his shoulders shaking as the reality of what he had done finally crushed down on him. The rage that bubbled up inside me wasn't just anger, it was in consuming, destructive fire. I felt a violent urge to rip Marcus out of that bed, to smash my fists into his face until he felt a fraction of the agony that was ripping through my ribs. I took a step into the room, my hands curling into tight fists, every muscle in my body coiled like a spring. Marcus saw the look in my eyes and immediately held his hands up in a defensive, pathetic gesture, begging me to calm down, telling me it wasn't what it looked like. That phrase, that stupid, insulting cliché, made something snap completely inside my brain. I let out a low, guttural roar and kicked the heavy wooden nightstand next to the door, sending it crashing to the floor, shattering the lamp and plunging half the room into deep shadow. Chloe shrieked, burying her face in her hands and sobbing hysterically, begging me to stop, telling me she was sorry. But the apologies felt like battery acid in my ears. I looked at Marcus, my voice dropping to a deathly, lethal whisper that carried more weight than any scream. I told him he had exactly 60 seconds to get his things and get out of my house, or I was going to ensure he left in the back of an ambulance. He didn't hesitate.
He scrambled out of the bed, entirely naked, desperately grabbing his jeans and shirt from the floor, trembling so badly he could barely get his legs through the denim. He didn't look at Chloe, and he didn't look at me. He just gathered his scattered clothes in a messy pile against his chest and bolted out of the room, his bare feet slapping frantically against the hallway stairs. A few seconds later, the heavy front door slammed shut down below, the sound echoing through the empty, ruined house like a gunshot. Then, there was only Chloe and me. The silence that followed Marcus's departure was deafening, filled only by the sound of her ragged, wet sobbing. She was still curled in a ball on the far side of the mattress, looking so small, so pathetic, and so entirely different from the woman I had cherished for years. I looked around our bedroom, noticing the small details that I had missed before. 2 empty wine glasses sitting on the dresser, Marcus's silver watch lying on her vanity, a trail of clothes leading from the doorway straight to the edge of the rug. Every single detail was a physical manifestation of a lie that had been growing right under my nose while I was away trying to provide for our future. I walked over to the edge of the bed, every step feeling like I was walking through wet cement. Chloe looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, tears tracking through her makeup. She reached a hand out toward me, her fingers trembling, desperately begging me to listen to her, swearing that it had only happened because she was lonely, that it didn't mean anything, that she still loved me.
Hearing her use the word love in that moment felt like a physical slap. I looked down at her hand, the diamond wedding ring I had saved for 2 years to buy sparkling under the remaining light, and a profound, icy numbness began to settle over the fire in my chest. The rage was slowly burning itself out, leaving behind a vast, empty wasteland of pure, unadulterated grief. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just looked at her with a cold, dead expression and asked her how long it had been going on. She choked on a sob, shaking her head, trying to deny it, but I repeated the question, my voice echoing off the walls with absolute finality. Finally, she broke, burying her face in her knees, and whispered that it had started the second week Marcus moved in. Nearly 2 months of lies, 2 months of looking me in the eye, kissing me goodbye at the door, and then welcoming my best friend into our bed the second my car pulled out of the driveway. The betrayal was absolute, a total and complete execution of everything we had built. The confession hung in the freezing air of our bedroom like a lethal gas, choking out whatever tiny, pathetic shred of hope I had left. 2 months. For 8 weeks, my life had been an elaborate, choreographed theater of betrayal.
I stood at the foot of our bed, staring at Chloe as she wept, but I wasn't seeing her anymore. I was seeing a stranger wearing my wife's face. My mind, operating on a cruel and hyper-vivid loop, began back-calculating every single day of those 2 months. I remembered the text messages she sent me while I was on site in Denver, telling me she was turning in early because she had a headache. I remembered coming home from Portland and finding the house spotless, music playing, and Chloe looking radiant, thinking she was just happy to have me back. She wasn't happy to have me back. She was riding the high of a secret life lived right under my roof. Every memory, every warm glance, every I love you texted from her phone over the last 60 days was instantly corrupted, turning into a sickening mockery of the marriage I thought I had. I backed out of the room, unable to look at her for another second without vomiting. Chloe scrambled out of the bed, the white sheet trailing behind her like a discarded shroud, crying out my name as she tripped over the shattered remnants of the nightstand. She reached for my arm, her fingers brushing against the fabric of my jacket, but I yanked myself away with such violent revulsion that she stumbled back against the wall. I told her if she touched me again, I wouldn't be responsible for what happened next. The dead, flat tone of my voice must have terrified her more than any screaming match, because she froze, her hands pressed flat against the drywall, her chest heaving as she watched me walk out. I went downstairs, my boots sounding incredibly loud against the stairs. The house felt entirely different now, like a crime scene that had just been cordoned off. The air was heavy, the shadows long and menacing. I walked straight into the kitchen, my hands shaking so badly I could barely open a cabinet door. I grabbed a bottle of bourbon I'd been saving for a special occasion, tore the seal off with my teeth, and took a massive, burning swig straight from the neck. It didn't dull the pain, it just gave the fire in my chest something else to burn. I leaned against the marble countertop, staring at the empty living room across the hall. That was when my eyes landed on the basement door. It was still wide open. Like a man possessed, I walked down the carpeted stairs into the space where Marcus had been living. The basement was warm, smelling faintly of his cologne and stale beer. I turned on the overhead fluorescent lights, the harsh glare exposing the absolute wreckage of my trust. There was the air mattress we had blown up together. There was the extra blanket Chloe had brought down for him because she was worried he'd get cold. On the coffee table sat a half-empty glass of whiskey and a plate with the remnants of a dinner I hadn't eaten.
They had been living a domestic life together while I was away, playing house in the home I paid for. I walked over to the small desk in the corner where Marcus kept his laptop and papers. My foot kicked something underneath the chair. I reached down and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. It belonged to Marcus. I shouldn't have opened it. Every rational part of my brain told me to drop it, to burn it, to walk away. But the morbid, self-destructive urge inside me won. I flipped it up into the most recent pages. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger of his thoughts, scribbled in his messy, chaotic handwriting. And there, written just 3 days prior, were notes about Chloe. He wrote about the way she looked in the morning, how they laughed when they went to grocery store together, and how guilty he felt, but how he couldn't stop, because she made him feel alive in a way his fiancée never had. But the phrase that broke me completely, the one that made the room spin until I had to drop to my knees on the cold basement floor, was a single underlined sentence. She told me she wishes she had met me first. Those 8 words completely erased our entire 10-year history. It wasn't just a physical mistake. It wasn't a momentary lapse of judgment brought on by loneliness or wine. She had given him her heart. She had looked at the man who stood beside me on our wedding day and told him that our entire life together was a second-place prize.
I sat there on the floor in the bright, unforgiving light of the basement, holding that notebook, feeling a profound sense of emptiness that I didn't know a human being could survive. The man I called my brother, the woman I called my wife, had systematically dismantled my identity, leaving me a ghost in my own home. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the sound of soft footsteps on the floorboards above brought me back to reality. I stood up, tucked the notebook into my heavy jacket pocket, and walked back upstairs. Chloe was sitting at the kitchen island, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan, her face washed clean of makeup, looking exhausted and broken. The hysteria was gone, replaced by a sullen, terrified resignation. When I walked into the kitchen, she looked up, her eyes pleading, searching my face for any sign of the man who used to forgive her minor flaws with a smile. She found nothing but stone. She started talking, her voice quiet, monotone, as if she were reading from a script she had practiced in her head. She tried to explain how it happened, telling me that after Marcus arrived, the house felt full of energy again. She talked about how my promotions and my constant travel had made her feel like an afterthought, like a fixture in a house rather than a partner in a life. She said Marcus was just there, listening to her, looking at her, validating her when she felt invisible.
Every word that came out of her mouth was an attempt to shift the weight of the guilt onto my shoulders, to make her betrayal a consequence of my ambition. I let her speak, not interrupting once, just watching the movement of her lips as the last remaining ties connecting me to her snapped one by one. When she finally finished, trailing off into a quiet sob, asking me what we were going to do next, I took another slow sip of the bourbon. I looked at her, the woman I had promised to love in sickness and in health, and realized the person I loved had never actually existed. I set the bottle down on the counter with a soft, definitive thud, looked her dead in the eye, and told her exactly what was going to happen. I told her she had until noon tomorrow to pack whatever could fit into her car and leave. I told her the house was mine, the life we built was dead, and I would be calling a divorce lawyer first thing in the morning. She stared at me, her mouth opening slightly as if she wanted to argue, to plead for counseling, or to beg for a second chance, but the absolute, freezing finality in my eyes silenced her. She closed her mouth, looked down at the marble countertop, and let out a long, shuddering breath. Without saying another word, she stood up and walked up the stairs, her footsteps heavy and slow. A few minutes later, I heard the faint rustle of suitcases being pulled from the closet and the sound of drawers slamming shut overhead. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't.
I sat in the armchair in the dark living room, the bottle of bourbon resting on the floor beside me, staring out the front window into the fog. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. I saw the look of terror on Marcus's face, the twisted silk nightgown, the amber glow of the lamp. The images were burned into my retinas like a permanent scar. I watched the dark sky slowly turn to a bruised, icy gray as the sun began to rise over the suburbs. The neighborhood woke up around me, cars starting up in driveways, people walking their dogs, kids waiting for the school bus. It was jarring how normal the world remained when my entire existence had been vaporized in a single evening. Promptly at 8 a.m., I picked up my phone and called a prominent family law attorney in downtown Seattle, a name I had found through a colleague months ago when we were discussing corporate contracts. I didn't care about the cost. I told the receptionist it was an emergency, and by 10:30 a.m., I was sitting in a high-rise office overlooking Elliott Bay, signing the initial paperwork to dissolve my marriage. The lawyer was a sharp, clinical woman who looked at my hollow eyes and didn't offer any empty platitudes.
She just gave me a checklist of assets, bank accounts, and documents she needed, telling me to secure our joint finances immediately. I went straight to the bank afterward, my movements completely mechanical, and transferred half of our shared savings into a new private account. I felt like a criminal, but I knew I was just surviving. When I got back to the house at 11:45 a.m., Chloe's car was backed up to the garage, the trunk wide open and packed to the brim with trash bags, clothes, and boxes of her personal belongings. She was standing in the foyer, holding a framed photograph of us from our honeymoon in Maui. When she saw me walk through the door, she hesitated, looking down at the frame, and then quietly set it face down on the entry table. She looked older, her skin sallow and her eyes hollowed out from a night of crying. She asked me where she was supposed to go. I told her I didn't care. I suggested she try Marcus, since they were so comfortable sharing a bed. The sarcasm in my voice was biting, but she didn't react. She just nodded, pulled her coat tightly around herself, and picked up her final bag. As she walked past me toward the door, she stopped for a brief second, her shoulder inches from mine. She whispered that she was truly sorry, that she never meant to hurt me, and that she hoped one day I could understand. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes fixed on the blank wall ahead of me until I heard the heavy click of the front door closing behind her. A moment later, her engine turned over, and the sound of her car fading down the street left the house in a silence so profound it made my ears ring. An hour later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from an unknown number, but I knew instantly who it was. It was Marcus. He had written a long, rambling paragraph, begging for my forgiveness, telling me that he was a coward, that he hated himself for what he had done, and that he valued our brotherhood more than anything in the world. He asked if we could meet up in a public place, just to talk, man to man, so he could try to explain. I stared at the glowing screen, my thumb hovering over the keypad. The urge to scream at him, to threaten him, to let loose the remaining poison in my veins was overwhelming. But as I sat there in the quiet of my ruined living room, looking at the empty space where his duffel bag used to sit, a strange, heavy clarity washed over me. I didn't want his explanations. I didn't need his guilt. I didn't type a single word in response. I blocked his number, deleted the message thread, and went through my contacts, removing his name, his email, and every photo of him from my phone. I did the same with Chloe. I systematically purged their digital existence from my life, cutting the cords completely. In the weeks that followed, the silence in the house became my constant companion. I didn't move out. I didn't sell the place, even though every room held a ghost. Instead, I spent my weekends tearing down the master bedroom wallpaper we had chosen together, painting the walls a sterile, neutral gray, and replacing the mattress. I threw away the entry table, the wine glasses, and every single item that had been tainted by those 2 months of deception. It was a violent, exhausting process of reclamation, a physical manifestation of trying to scrub the betrayal out of my own skin. Sometimes, late at night, when the Seattle rain starts drumming against the window panes just like it did that Tuesday in October, I find myself staring at the front door. I think about the man I was before I opened it. A man who believed in absolute loyalty, who trusted his wife blindly, and who loved his best friend like a brother. That man died the moment the door hit the wall. The person sitting in this chair now is colder, harder, and deeply suspicious of the world. The divorce was finalized 6 months later, a clean, clinical cutting of ties that left me with the house and a hollowed-out bank account. I never saw Marcus again, and I only spoke to Chloe through our attorneys. They both vanished into the fog of the city, leaving me alone with the wreckage. I still look at the door sometimes, hearing that phantom knock in the quiet hours of the night, realizing that the most dangerous storms don't always give you a warning. Sometimes you invite them right inside.